Hi, my name is Connor Harbison. I'm the founder of Atlas Urban Farms, and we create vertical farming systems for restaurants.
I love a really good, clean, easy pitch. Like what do you do? Here it is in a nutshell.
Yeah,
I love it. Connor, thank you very much for being here. Um,
thank you for having me.
I usually literally when a person comes into the podcast, I have to remember how I found you. And you were, all right, so you attended my alma mater of Babson College, and I was a mentor for a lot of different groups and what was I'm trying to think of what was the pitch competition that you guys did, but
I think we met at Summer
summer
Venture Program.
there
Yeah,
you go. Yep,
yeah,
summer ventures. And something about you, I mean, anything that has to do with food, I'm gonna talk like I'm in it. Not only because I love, I mean, I'm a foodie and I love traveling around the world and trying new things. And my mom's a chef, but more so because we have a major global issue with food, pros and
yeah,
cons. And so we will definitely talk about that. But I always say before we understand the company, before we understand what the bigger problem is, let's get to know who the person behind the company is. So from and you're such a youthful man. So from where are you from to your time, like when you started Babson? Talk to me. Who are you? Let's just say, who are you?
sure. And thank you for calling me youthful. Thank you. Uh, I so I used to joke that I'm like the Fresh Prince. I was born in West Philadelphia, and I grew up in the middle of Philadelphia. I have very strong opinions about cheesesteaks. I'm vegetarian now, so I don't eat them anymore. But if you're ever going, or anybody on the podcast is ever going, don't go to Pat's or Geno's. They're tourist traps. Seriously, just go to like a corner store. Like it's gonna be so much better, right? It's really street food, right? So I grew up in Philadelphia. I loved history. One of my grandfathers is a history professor, uh, and I never really thought about what I was going to do. Yeah, I'll go to undergrad and get a history degree, and I don't know, life will figure itself out. Um, and I went to the University of Pittsburgh, so I stayed in Pennsylvania, and that was really great. Very different from Philadelphia. Um, Pennsylvania is one of those interesting states where you drive 5 hours in one direction and it's totally different. And I got to meet a lot of really cool people. And around that time, I thought, well, a lot of people with history degrees go to law school, so I'll probably do law school, something like that. Um, I was fortunate enough to intern in Washington, D.C. one summer, and I really enjoyed that. It was really like a bunch of 23-year-olds who are sort of running everything. I was like, oh, they're not that different from me. I could do this. So that was sort of my goal, and I remember watching The West Wing, and when it first came out, House of Cards was this and Veep, and it was like, oh, this is the world I want to be in.
Wait, I'm going to
Uh,
pause you. I'm going to pause you.
yeah,
So there's so many things that you
please,
said that I'm intrigued with. So okay,
yeah,
so Mr. Youthful, you're showing some age when you're naming some shows. So now like I go, some of these shows you're not watching them on repeat, so you watch them live. So we're going to talk about that. But let's go back to your grandfather.
yeah.
What did mom and dad do? Do you have siblings?
Yeah, so I have a younger sibling, Grace. She's amazing. She lives in New York. Ever since she was like 8, she said, I'm going to live in New York. And she was the first one of her friends in college to get a job before she graduated. So she had a wonderful senior spring, and she was like, I'm going to New York. Um, and she sort of graduated a few months before the pandemic. So it wasn't all uh, sunshine and roses, but she's living there. She's working in marketing. She loves it. She's totally Manhattan, and I'm very much not, I would say. Uh, I like Boston a lot. I think it's a good place for me to be. And I was actually just in New York last weekend, and it was great, but it was, oh man, I couldn't live there, I don't think. Um, Two parents. My mom was a teacher. Pretty much everyone in my family has been teachers. All Yeah, four of my grandparents, like 6 or 7 aunts and uncles, both of my parents to some degree. And then my dad is a surgeon and he teaches medicine. Um,
So with all that being said, you have all these like education all around you. I mean, like
yeah,
there was no wiggle room for your sisters. If you and your sister said, yeah, we're not going to go to school, that would have probably not worked out in the realm of all this academia around you?
That was never even a conversation. I don't think that was ever um ever a concept, you know. Um yeah,
You're
it
like,
was
yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
all. I have nothing else. That was
No,
not going to be allowed. So there.
yeah, it just wasn't like it would be like, well, let's discuss if whales went to the moon. Well, that's not a thing that's going to happen. So why would we just yeah, it just was not. And me at 17 was I'm 29 now to
You're
put
still
a number
youthful,
on
my
it.
friend. You're
Thank you.
still adorably youthful.
Thank you very much.
I'm 53, so there. So to get understanding where, like, we
Yeah.
know it. Like back in the day, your grandfather, I'm sure, looked old to you. They don't look well. Like grandfathers don't look old nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. They're in their 90s now.
Mhm.
And my dad is like an insane runner. He run like he's injured himself so many times because he like does not stop. It'll be interesting to see him as he gets older because I think it's going to be very different. My grandfather like eating steak and potatoes and like not exercising after college versus my dad who's like this insane like, oh, if I don't work out twice a day then it's a wasted day. So it'll be interesting.
It'll be
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, and yeah, and again, we're gonna go back to them. So
Mhm.
academia was not something that you. I mean, like academia in regards of going, but being an educator, was that something that you really, you or your sister wanted to like be in that realm of?
I don't think so. My mom was very much she was like a long-term substitute. So she was home a lot, so we weren't encountering that in that way.
Mhm.
We had a few friends whose parents were teachers, so I certainly saw it sort of secondhand. Um, but no, I don't think so. I mean, I vividly remember, I think in fifth grade we had to make like a sculpture of ourselves as an adult. And it had to be like, what are you doing? Like what's your job? And I was, I don't know what I want to do. I'm 10. Like that's so far in the future. And to give you an example of like how accurate my people pot was, um, it was completely bald and had a big red goatee, which obviously I've
I was gonna say
captured the
red.
likeness. Just I think I like the red paint, you know. And like I tried to make it like a bodybuilder because I don't know because obviously that's what I do. But like then in the kiln the hands fell down, so they're just sort of out to the side.
Uh-huh.
um it's a very strange it's one of those things like you know kids end up with like oh this like painting I did as like an 8-year old and it's like it's like oh yeah that's a thing that we have so
So,
yeah.
so you're watching all these academia, like academics, I say, all these that's academics around you. Your dad's a surgeon, which of course that's another route. So professors, substitute teachers, surgeon that's educating, and yet your sister and you just were like, what was it that made you think about not going that route? Like, what was it that all of a sudden piqued your interest that I'm going to go to school and I'm going to go this other direction? And when you went to school in Philadelphia, what was your major?
Pittsburgh. I studied
Pittsburgh.
history. Yeah, European history,
Mhm.
and then political science as a double major. Um, I don't think it was as much. I'm not interested in this. I think it's always been. I think I've always been. I'm going to do what interests me.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's worked out really well for me, and sometimes that has not. Because
Give me an
it's
example
like,
of give me an example of when it didn't work out for you.
um, literally any math class in middle school, high school, any of my classes I didn't like in college, I just wouldn't apply myself because it's like, this isn't intellectually interesting, so I don't care. Um, and it would be, my teachers would be, especially in like high school, be like, look, we know you can do the work.
Mhm.
I I think it was 10th grade. I forget what math, maybe ninth grade. I don't know. Sometime in there. I did really poorly on a couple math classes in a row, or math tests in a row, like
Uh,
D minus, something like that. And then like I had to have a meeting with my mom and the teacher, and they were both like, you gotta pull it together. And then I got like 5 A's in a row because it's like I could do it, I just didn't want to. Um, so
I
that's
have
the
I
time.
always say to people that when one applies something, you can succeed in everything. And so we as A types are one chromosome for saving the world or taking it out. So
Yeah,
because when we're focused on our thing, we are all in. We are all 100% in.
yeah,
Quick little stop on Philadelphia. So I worked for the Pennsylvania Conference for Women. We bounced 1 year Philadelphia, 1 year Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh artsy and like I go the Andy Warhol and the food and it's just so interesting. It's clean. It's like very communal in regards of the community really takes care of their own. Philadelphia, Liberty Bell, very clean in this one area. And then the second 1 mile, 1 mile, 1 mile, 1 mile from the Liberty Bell, it's filthy and it's just too
yeah.
much, too fast. How did you juggle both worlds? Because Philadelphia is pretty much like a Boston, and I'm sorry, Pittsburgh is very much like Boston. Philadelphia is very much like a New York, but you were from West Philadelphia, so one would assume that New York would should be your jam.
Um, I think that, how to phrase it? That's really interesting. What year were you in Pittsburgh?
Let's see. Goodness gracious. Many things have happened in my life. So it was between 2005 2009. I mean
Okay.
2007 because I entered B school into I entered Babson at
Yeah.
2007. So it was like
Okay.
2005 2007. I was freelancing and working at
Interesting.
the
Okay.
conference.
So I was there just after that. I was in school 2011 to 2015,
Okay.
is when I lived in Pittsburgh. And then I didn't go back until I want to say 2019. I visited
Mhm.
a couple times in 2019, like just before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I was astounded by how much it had changed. And of course, I had not,
No.
in a good way,
Oh, okay.
yeah, just much more. I think tech and gentrification are really bad, but I also think that they have helped rehabilitate Pittsburgh. And
Really?
I wasn't in Pittsburgh 30 years ago. Um, but my sense between, like let's say 2014 and 2019 was that there's a lot more young people in the city, like late 20s, maybe early 30s. There's a lot more sort of going on in each neighborhood. I think Pittsburgh's really interesting because it's very divided up, because like physically divided because of the hills and the rivers. So
Mhm.
it's I think each neighborhood is sort of its own. Um, you can't just start walking in like Boston or Philly. You can walk, or even New York,
Yeah.
and some you can walk and just keep going and going. And Pittsburgh is a little bit more like this zone, and there's a big river. There's like a huge hill. Um, I do think there's something to be said, to your point about the smallness and the sort of Philadelphia is so large.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. It is, and I definitely would agree with you that um, I guess that the city as a whole might not have as much of an identity as a smaller city.
Yeah.
Um, I would also recommend you go when like the Phillies are in the World Series or something, or when the when the Eagles are in the playoff, and you'll see a much more much more tight knit city.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I I think of Boston and Philadelphia as being much more similar than Philadelphia and Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I Sorry, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
I get that. Well, I
Yeah,
think that's one of the things where, like, I mean, people, I mean, when they think about Massachusetts, they think about Boston. And I'm like, oh, we have a
yeah,
whole state. We have a whole state that no one thinks about. But whenever people think about sports, schools, medical, diversity, they think about Boston. I'm like, I go, but we have a whole big state that you guys should check out the entire state because it has so much more to offer. But yet on
yeah.
vacation, they're like, well, I'm going down the Cape. I'm like, but yet you say Boston all the time. They're like, I know, I'm going down the Cape. I'm like, okay. So all that being said, all right. So wait, so you're in Pittsburgh, you go to school, you graduate. what were your plans? Like, what did you want to do?
Honestly, I had no idea. I did an extra semester at school because I
Mhm.
was finishing up a couple classes. So a lot of my friends had graduated. I felt like I was overstaying my welcome a little bit. Um, and I had the summer, I guess after my senior year and before that extra semester, I did like a finance internship in Philadelphia at
Mhm.
this wealth management that I really disliked. Um, and during that time, I said, I got to do something just out there. So to come back to the education piece, I had done a paper on Indonesia, and I was like, I'm going to go to Indonesia for a little while, just because it's wild. And my dad suggested, like, well, don't just go there, like do something, right?
Yeah.
So I applied to one of those teaching service organizations, um, and I was accepted, and I did that. Which I think now I probably wouldn't have done that because there's, you know, white college graduate from the US going to a global South country teaching English, um, but that
But wait, wait,
experience,
wait,
I was like,
wait, wait.
yeah,
You have to say more. I mean, like, you can't just like, so for the people that are listening, you're doing with your hands, like, what, I mean, what was, because there's so many people that I know that have gone on these, like, I'm going to do the best way for me to like find myself or to figure out what I want to do. I'm going to go teach English somewhere. And they
yeah,
work because if someone comes in, it's a benefit for the country. It's a benefit for these organizations. It's a benefit for these families that are able to afford to make sure that their children can speak English because it's leverage. I mean, it's leverage, so it's not a bad thing. So why was it not great for you, in your opinion, or was it
it was
great for
great.
you?
No, it was great. It was great. I think it's the framing it as tourism. It was entirely. I was 22 when I did that, and I was one of the old ones. Most people were 18, 19. Um, and it was like a party. Which don't get me wrong, it was a ton of fun. We were in Bali. Bali's amazing. We're going to the beach every weekend. We were in Ubud. Um, I think thinking about, okay, I or many other people go and do these types of uh, assignments for. I also did 2 months. Most people do 2 weeks, so it's much more. I was with my students for 2 months, right? Um, it's much more, I think, disruptive. If you have a new person teaching you every other week, basically. Um, and I completely agree, especially in I don't know the details everywhere, but I know Bali, like if you can speak English, you can get into the tourist industry and it's a huge economic differentiator. Um, yeah, I just the idea, and don't get me wrong, I got a bunch of amazing pictures with my teaching teammates and with my students, and like it was my Facebook profile for a while, and it was like I did all the things, right? I I think now, what is it, like 7 years later, 7.5 years later, I would just be a little bit more thoughtful about how I did it. And if you're going to have fun, go and have fun. I think it's like when you go to have fun and say, I'm making a difference. I am, you know, I am just the best person I walk on water because I am here, with my presence. And hey, it's okay to just go to a vacation in Bali. We kind of, sort of, not really joke. My business school friends and I were like, Babs in Bali weekend in 2 years. We're doing it. I don't know if we're gonna do it, but we joke like, hey, we're gonna go and we're gonna have fun and it's gonna be great. Are we gonna do service? No, we're not. Are we gonna drink a lot of alcohol? Probably, probably.
It's funny because like my brother works in Dubai and he works for a startup where my base is Dubai, but I could work anywhere. And the first thing he said, he
yeah,
goes, "Yeah, I think I'm going to work in Bali for a year." I'm like, and I will be there. I will be there. And I have a close
hmm
friend that lives here where her dad was in the service, but then he became a contractor and he was traveling around. And she went to private school in Indonesia. And
yeah,
she's like, to this day they have their class reunion, and they're like, "Where in the world do we want to meet?" They're like Bali. There's nowhere. We
yeah,
don't want to go
yeah,
anywhere else but this location. So it hasn't lost its like this zest of fun, engagement, natural like habitat. I mean, like it hasn't lost its thing. So Bali is still Bali.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess as I'm speaking through this, I would say, like, if you're gonna go and help somebody, that's great. I think we need more of that. We haven't gotten to it yet, but I did a year of service with AmeriCorps here in the US. Um, you're
Is
gonna
this
go and help.
wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know you're gonna answer this question, but with all those things, were they in the same process of you finding yourself and trying to figure out what you want to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I am coming back to what did you want to do after college? This is the long the like I
This
studied.
is why I love this podcast because
Yeah.
I'm like, I go, you're talking, and I'm like, I go, you're saying things, and I know it's gonna come back full circle, but like I love giving you an opportunity to talk versus snippets of just like talking about work only. That you're a whole person before a business starts. And I always say, like, I need to know a lot more than most people do.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it comes from the historian in me. It's like, well, why is this thing? Let me start way back here. I like, you know. But I think you saying like, or not you, but like someone saying, hey, I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna try to help them out as best I can. Awesome. I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna land a beach and I'm gonna have fun. Awesome. I think for me the thing that doesn't feel good for me is when you say I'm going here to help everybody out, and it's actually I'm here to have a blast and take some pictures with some kids and put it all on Instagram and pat myself on the back and use it as an experience to write an essay for grad school or something. And it's these people's lives. Right.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, in true reality, I mean, we are humans. I go, and because we are humans, that happens. I mean, it's like it's not a bad or a good. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just it's a thing that happens. I worked with kids. I worked with my entire career. I was a teacher. I started my career as a teacher. I worked at summer camps because teachers don't make a lot of money, as you probably know this very well. And we work at summer camps, and we have fun. We're young. We get out there. We're having fun with kids. The second the kids went to bed, we're like, "Who's on tonight?" And you're like, "We're going to the bars." So we've all gone through these experiences to this day. There's all these summer camps that everyone goes to these summer camps. I live in a town where the bus comes, like the week before school closes, the bus comes and collects trunks. And then the next day after school ends, everyone is on a bus. Bye, have a great summer. And then they come back probably a week before school starts. But every single person that's worked there, they know the stories of, I mean, there's like the story, like I go at band camp or at camp, like everyone has their first experiences of life at camp that you just won't get at home.
Yeah.
So those experiences that you got overseas, it's not bad or good. It's just like, it's your experience. And so don't over reflect on it because everyone has their experiences and everyone takes away with it. And if it's an essay, great, because that means that somebody else is being inspired by your essay, whether it's real or not, whatever. It's your photos on Instagram. People need inspirations in different ways, in different forms, and whatever way you could, like you going out there and just doing it, it's a plus.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. So the cherry on top of this whole story.
Yeah.
I like to travel. I sort of like the government politics thing. I said, how can I combine these? State Department. Let me go work in an embassy and get paid for it. And I took the test. It's like the SAT, but for State Department.
Yeah.
You don't really pass the test because it's very, like, the way they do it is very, we're not telling anything, but I moved on to the second round. I wrote some essays, and at that point I did not move on to the next round. Like 200 people got an interview out of 20,000 applicants, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, foreign service, it's extraordinarily competitive. Mm-hmm. So that was when I moved to DC. I worked in politics very briefly, right after Trump's inauguration, which was not a great time to be looking for jobs. Anyone out there looking for jobs?
What was the role that you wanted to do in politics?
It's really just something entry level on Capitol Hill. I really liked legislation. That's where I focused. It was my focus during my political science degree. I think I've always been interested in how you go from, hey, the world should be like this, to the world actually being like this,
Mhm.
right? And one method of that is legislation. Another method of that is startups. So we'll come back to that. Yeah.
And you are speaking my language because I did media as a press
Yeah.
secretary, and I work with startups. So
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
and I'm international because I'm first generation born in this country. So you've just hit all parts of my life. Thank you very much. Good job. Good job. Good job.
Obviously, I planned that. You know, of course. I came in, okay, these are the things, you know, I'm gonna say them like
It's not
all
on her
within,
LinkedIn, but she guessed. I guessed it all. I guessed it all.
yeah, just ESPN or something. Yeah, so I applied to a ton of jobs. I didn't get any, because, you know, fresh college grad with a poli sci degree is a very rare commodity in Washington, D.C. Um, and I was on a date, and she said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a professional job applicant." And she said, "You should look at AmeriCorps." I was like, "All right, sure, more resumes into the void." But they started getting back to me. I was like, well, "This is different. This is new. This is pleasant." The
Someone's
very first
responding to
one,
my application. What?
yeah, it was really cool. I was like, "Wow, this is what." Am I dreaming? I gotta pinch myself.
But during this time, you're applying to all these different things. What were your parents? I mean, they were like, "Oh my God, he's flailing. What's happening here?" Or were they supportive of you just the discovery stage?
They were supportive. I'd lived at home for a little while, and it got to the point where I was definitely having a lot of friction with them.
Mhm.
And eventually I was like, "Look, I I I budgeted, I think it was like 6 months. I can afford 6 months of rent and living expenses in DC. I'm doing this. I would love to have you on board, but I'm moving out." And I think I gave myself like 2 months or something like that. I was like, "Look, it is." I think it was right before the holidays in 2016. And I was like, "I'm not going to move down there and then come back for Christmas." And then, you know, that seemed, it's like, okay, February, I think it was February.
Yep.
February, I'm moving down there. Here's my plan. And the first week I got down there, I was getting like 4 or 5 coffee meetings with people a day. So it wasn't like I'm down there, like DC's a lot of fun. It was no. It was like I'm down there, I'm like taking the metro to Maryland, taking it back, going to Virginia. Like I was just running all over. And I was, after 4 days, I was able to get a fellowship on Capitol Hill, which didn't pay the rent, but it was, hey, I have
It was a
something.
job. It was a job.
Yeah, it was somewhere to go every day, and that was very helpful. But also, you know, didn't turn into anything paid. So, um, the AmeriCorps folks reaching out to me, very first one was from Montana, and I said, "I live in the capital of the world. Most powerful people in the world live where I live. There's no way I'm moving to Montana." Smash cut to, it's like the Always Sunny in Philadelphia thing. Like Connor Harbison moves to Montana. I ended up on the call. I had a bunch of calls with different people. There was some education ones. Actually, the plan had been to teach, you know, school in DC or something and continue to network and then get back in. But I ended up on didn't want to go to Montana, but I said, I'll just take the phone call. And it was this guy. I learned more about him later. So we'll come back to him. But we had the regular, like, what's your communication style? What's an experience that you've shown leadership? Tell me more, but, you know, all the interview questions. And then at the end, he said, "If you were a merman, what kind of tail would you have?"
What?
Like
That's a good one. That is a good one.
Yeah. And I like thought about it for a second. And this was in 2017, so we weren't doing video.
There was Skype back in the day, but yes, like we're on the phone like regular people.
Yeah. And so I took a second. I was like, I would have a shark's tail, and here's why. It's dark on top, light on the bottom. It's camouflage. If you're looking down, it's dark. If you're looking up, it's light. Are mer people predators? Are they prey? I don't know. I don't want to risk it. And it was like, you know, that was my like right away. And he was like, he laughed. We said something or other. At the end of the call, he was like, "You should look at housing." And then I got a call from the AmeriCorps higher ups, and they said, "Yeah, we'd like you to be in Montana in 3 weeks. You've got 24 hours to decide." Said, can I have more? They're like, yeah, we'll give you 48 hours. So
I do love that. You know, I'm going to say that I do love that method because too much time is too much time.
Mhm,
Just
mhm.
enough time is the right amount of time. That's the way that I answer that question because it's so smart because when I'm hiring interns, I give them 3 days. Here's congratulations, here's the NDA. You'll know very clearly if someone's like, I'm in. Or
Yeah,
the ones like, the hemming and the hawing people, you don't want them in your company anyway.
yeah. Yeah, so I had a sense like, okay, I'm gonna do this crazy thing. I'm gonna go to Montana. I'm gonna learn how startups work. And by the way, that's what the job was helping members of underserved communities um, start businesses so they could work themselves out of poverty. Specifically, the communities I was working with were
Yep.
women, veterans, and Native Americans. So not me. Uh,
What? For anyone that's
yeah,
listening, what? You're not any of those three things? That's shocking. What?
yeah.
What, Connor?
Um,
What?
so I was like, let's all the paperwork gets taken care of. It's like, okay, I've got 2 weeks. I'm going to this state I've never been to. Family friends would be like, do they have electricity in Montana? Do they have like the internet? And literally nobody I ever met had been to Montana.
Isn't that the
Uh,
funniest thing where we're in the United States, people are still thinking, are there places in the United States that doesn't have electricity? I mean, there are, but not in Montana. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
and I'm not sure how familiar you are with Bozeman, but Bozeman is considered.
I've actually gone to Montana a few times,
Yeah,
FYI. Yeah, I've actually been that person with camping, hiking.
yeah,
I have friends
yeah,
that have like a camp there.
nice. Where in
Love
Montana?
Montana, like one of my favorite states,
Yeah, it's great. Where in Montana?
Bozeman.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's where I lived for 3 years.
I'm jealous. Like the second you said Montana, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
I'm like jealous. Like it's
Yeah.
beautiful. If you're an outdoorsy person, if you're not an outdoorsy person, it'll freak you out because yeah, there are grizzlies. I mean, there's stuff
Oh
out
yeah.
there. And when
Yeah.
you go on a hike, you got to be aware of your surroundings. And so, yeah, most people, city folk, don't go to Montana.
Yeah. So I got out there and I bought bear spray. I was a regular at REI. I was going camping or hiking every single weekend. I went to you might have seen on the video. I have my water bottle here with all the stickers from all
Back
the
in the
national
day, I
parks
used
I
to be
went
the same
to.
person, but now I have them all on my computer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was great. I thought it was going to be a year, and then I was going to go to law school and get back into politics. And I really fell in love with the whole startup thing because I think in politics it was like, well, we want to do this thing, but here's a million reasons we can't.
Mm.
Uh, Take your pick, you know. Um, and startups is like, well, let's go and do it. And if something stops us, we'll figure it out. And I think both methods are good for solving different problems.
Mm.
I think if you're gonna reform the healthcare system, startups is probably not going to do that. But if you're, you know, trying to get around a city, like the Congress is not going to help with that, right? Like an app, like an Uber or like the Bird scooter, or I don't know, some solution on
Well,
that side is probably
well,
going to be
just
needed.
so you know, I disagree with I nodded my head, but I disagree with the whole entire concept of healthcare reform because you're looking at the Jeff Bezos, you're looking at the Elon Musk, you're looking at individuals that have the money, but they are startup mentality of we need to fix the problems of pharmaceuticals, we need to fix the problems of medical care, and so startups are the start. It's the start of anything and everything, and yet the government adopts it once they see the distraction in space. I mean, they just scrubbed for the umpteenth day the spaceship going from NASA, where we have other individuals like I go, well, we have another group of people going to space or the edge of space, and China is right there too. So it's all dependent on government is great to a point, but there's a lot of barriers that make that prevent for big changes. And startups are a great place to start those changes.
Yeah, I would agree. I think startups are really good for testing something out and figuring it out. And then when you say, okay, we have the thing that works, now let's do a million of them,
Yep.
then bringing in, government funding or grants or nonprofits or universities or something like that.
Right.
Um, and that's sort of the intersection I was at. I was at Montana State University, working in a group called Blackstone Launchpad. We were startup coaches, and we gave funding to student ventures, and um, I worked with about 1,000 early stage ventures in those 3 years.
Okay, so walk me through from Blackstone to your business. What happened what happened where all of a sudden you're like, instead of coaching, I'm the creator?
Yeah. Couple things. So the very first thing, it was Labor Day weekend 2017, so almost 5 years ago exactly. I went camping in Grand Teton National Park, still my favorite park. And I came down into Jackson to get a beer after my hike because I wanted it. And across the street from Snake River Brewing was this building. It was all glass and steel, did not fit in, right? And on the side it said Vertical Harvest, and it was this vertical farm. And that was the first time I saw that technology. I was like, that's super cool. That's the future. And then I didn't think about it for 3 years until I came to Babson. So just that one goes in the back burner. About a year into my time at the Launchpad, I'd worked with a bunch of ventures very much on the sidelines. And I was doing outreach, right? So it was even more another step removed, right? And it just seemed very cool what people were doing. So I started thinking, okay, what are some problems I have? Scheduling meetings was one, because I was a professional networker. There was a time I was a regular at 3 different coffee shops in Bozeman. And I spent all my time, okay, how does Wednesday work? Oh no, Tuesday, okay, 11 a.m. No, 12:30, And I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started talking to people and said, how do you do this? And most of them said, that's not, I have a solution. It's not that big of a pain point. But email introductions are such a pain, right? And sort of like, hey, I know you know Elon Musk. Can you connect me to him? That whole process. And I started asking people, not like I would be meeting with people for my job, and at the end be like, by the way, how do you do email introductions? By the way, just tack on 2 or 3 minutes at the end of a meeting. And I spoke to probably about 200 people that way. And some of them were repeat, some of them were extended conversations, but I came up with a solution, and I wireframed it out, and I sort of followed the business model canvas, all of that stuff. And then I eventually taught myself to code so I could build it, because there's not a lot of developers out in Montana, and the ones that are there can charge a very high price. So I said, okay, I'm not making nearly enough money to pay them to build this thing, and I couldn't raise money unless I had something to show. So it's a sort of a chicken and egg. So I built a web app, very simple, basically a Mad Libs of like, who are you? Who do you want to meet? Why do you want to meet them? I think there were 4 or 5 fields, and it would basically build an email. I would click send, it would send it to you, you would send it to them, and then they could connect with me directly, and you're out of the picture. So it's easy on you, we get connected, and if it's not the right time, you just don't forward it on, and that's it. And I was working on that. I had realized, hey, I want to do this, but there's a ton I don't know. So that's when I started thinking about business school and taking the GMAT and all of that. And it eventually got to the point where I realized saving people time on their emails doesn't really get me out of bed in the morning. It's not, I wasn't put on the earth to make a widget that helps you save however much time. There's a couple businesses out there that do that. I think there's one called Bridge. I know there's one called Hunters with a Z. So the idea was a good idea. I still stand by that. I just don't think I was in the right place to follow it through, and I don't think I was in the right place or the right person to take it forward. So I got into Babson, was very excited about it. It's coming back to the East Coast. And I knew I wanted to graduate with a startup. I knew I had spoken to a few recent alumni, and they said, look, if you want to graduate with a startup, you got to be working on it the entire time. And they named a couple things, Blank Center, Summer Venture Program, all of these different great programs at Babson. And so I had a couple areas that I was sort of interested in. I had recently learned about mushrooms that eat plastic. So I was like, oh, that could be kind of interesting. Maybe it's a modified mushroom spore that you can drop on a oil spill and it eats up all the plastic, and now you're not using it. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. Or I had been speaking to someone who went to Stanford for business school, and he was funding his business school through an income share agreement. So basically treating himself like a startup, people invested in him and got a chunk of his future earnings. Yeah. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. What if that were more widely available? Right. Because then
wait a second. That would literally be the happy place for a lot of people. So whatever's happening with that one, that would be a smart thing. But I just want to pause for a quick second. Yeah. I love how someone said to you, and it's like, I feel that this is the wisest thing. If you want to have a startup, you have to work through the entire time that you're in school. Best advice ever, because too many times people are like, I'm just going to sit back and learn, and then I'll do it afterwards, not realizing that every class you take literally gets injected into what you're doing. Because when I graduated in 2009 recession, my business of 13 years, it was my capstone. And when I graduated, I was taught how to scale a company, not how to start it. And so I love that the model is very much where someone told you, you need to work on it the entire time, because you'll find out very quickly, when you have all this advice around you, you'll find out very quickly what works and what doesn't work because you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it informed which classes I took. It informed which professors I got to know.
Yep.
There was always a so what to the classes. It was like, okay, I said it earlier, if something doesn't interest me intellectually, I'm not going to apply myself to it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much like, oh, do this finance homework. It's do this finance homework so you can do it for real on the business.
Yeah.
Right. And I used the business, and it pivoted several times throughout
as it should, as it's growing.
Yeah. And it was good to always have that sort of North Star. And one interesting illustration of that, so my friends and I all graduated in May. Like 2 weeks before graduation, we were going and getting our cap and gowns and all the tassels and everything. And all my friends had all the stuff for all the clubs they were in, and I didn't have anything because I didn't have a club. I wasn't in any clubs. I had Atlas Urban Farms,
I had my business, more realistic and more user friendly than a club.
Yeah. And it's just like, I think it really depends what you want to get out of it, right? I don't think that being a founder is the right path for everybody. Mm-hmm. I think it takes a lot of comfort with uncertainty. I think it takes an acceptance, like, hey, we're gonna launch this thing into the world at like 20% of where it needs to be, or 50%, whatever the percentage.
Yeah.
And that's something I struggle with today. Like, I'm very much a perfectionist. But I think that a lot of people want to see, so we met at SVP, mm-hmm. Like up on a stage, like everyone's looking at you, you have a nice, clean, slick slide deck. Yep. But like the point to get there is my boss back in Montana would talk about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, right? And entrepreneurs were like, okay, here, I'm going to figure this out. And I remember vividly a person who came in to talk to us, and he had military experience, which was great. He had this awesome idea for a satellite company, and it was very cool. I said, cool. So you have the relevant experience. You want to do this.
Yeah.
How are you gonna solve this? Or how are you gonna, I forget basically how.
Yeah.
And his answer was, oh, I don't know. Some nerd is gonna figure it out. Like, okay. All right. Whatever. Yeah. We'll be friendly. We'll help you. But like, this isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, that's the case. Look, and I mean, I get that. I always use it as an example of there's the Starbucks individuals that are like, I have an idea, and then there's the people that are actually doing it. And so whenever someone says, like, I go, do you work with individuals that are idea? I'm like, I go, I'm marketing. If it's not real, it doesn't work. I go, so I can come up with every single bells and whistles, but unless it's real and we can test it, it doesn't really matter. So I get that. What do you walk us through? What is the company and what does it do?
Yeah, so I'll start with what it does. Right now, we have a product that is out and up and running. It is a vertical farming wall panel. So what that means is we take a container. I'm trying to find a good picture. I guess I'll just describe it because some of this is visual, some of it isn't.
And we'll add the visuals
Yeah.
that you give us so that way
Okay.
people can see
Yeah.
it. But I mean, but what I mean, I think that's the biggest thing because years ago in 2009 when I like graduated, I started working with accelerators. Freight Farms was
Mhm.
the first thing that like I mean, that was the first company that I ever like realized like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing we can, because everyone knows greenhouses, and then Freight Farms is a company that they started using containers and started growing. So since then it's been growing. And while you were talking, I was Googling because I remember like literally this past Sunday on CBS News, they had this like vertical harvest. So
Yeah.
what do you do that is similar, different than what it's becoming a thing because food is a situation, fresh food, the
Yep.
lettuce and tomatoes is a problem, especially like there's like embargoes where you can't get food from Mexico because depending on
Yeah.
the government. So that's why I want to know like what is it and what is it? Why does it exist? And what are the pros and cons for you of why you created it?
Yeah. So what is it? It is a human-sized system. So pretty much anyone can pick it up. It hangs on the wall just like a TV, and you can grow about a pound of herbs every week. We're starting with herbs, and we're gonna grow to tomatoes, peppers. Eventually, I think we'll have a microgreens application. That might be a different system. Leafy greens, but basically, you can hang this in any space. The current one takes about 150 50 square feet of growing space, condenses it to 1.5 square feet, but they are stackable. So average human can, we think we can do about 3 of the panels vertically and take 150 square feet and condense it to 1.5 square feet. So there's a couple benefits to that. So number one, urban spaces are very tight. I just had to find an apartment in Boston, and let me tell you, the prices they are charging per square foot. Oh man, um, good luck getting any growing space of any size. And even for someone like a Freight Farms, they have amazing technology. But if you don't have the space for a shipping container, then you're out of luck, right? So it was very important to us. How can we shrink this down to basically make it accessible to any person, any space? We're not here saying we are going to rebuild the urban landscape, but we think we can create a piece of technology that can fit in to the nooks and crannies, to the, oh, you have a hallway, let's turn it into a garden. You have a lobby, let's turn it into a garden. You have a, um, any space. I tell people I could grow tomatoes in a closet. So really thinking about how we can take the bare essentials, so light, water, nutrients, and basically put it in a box and make that box so that anybody, doesn't matter if you're a botanist with a PhD or just somebody who likes greenery, you can hang it on a wall and you can have fresh food, and everyone should have access to that.
Sorry, we're in dead space because I was
Bless
sneezing.
you.
Oh my goodness gracious. That's like
Bless you.
allergies. Um, where did the idea come from though? Because I mean, you just named so many. I mean, you graduate your history. You definitely like. You need to understand like where it came from. Like, I mean, I like you tell me something. Where did it come from? Let's just dig deep. And then you
Yeah.
travel overseas. You're in Montana. Where did this idea even come from? Because, I mean, yes, we need it. Yes, it's cool, but And yes, you learn, you taught yourself how to code, but it still doesn't get
Yeah.
us to where this all came to be.
So let's go back to Wyoming. When I saw vertical harvest, I said, that's the future. And I didn't think about it for 3 years. I'm coming into Babson. I have a couple ideas. I just keep coming back to this idea of urban food supply and not knowing a ton about it. I say, look, we have vertical farms, we have rapidly urbanizing world. I think those two things can then intersect. So my idea at the time was to build one of these big vertical farms, building size, and basically put one in every neighborhood. And the idea was, look, you're never going more than a 5-minute walk for your fresh produce. The economics of that don't really work out. It's very capital intensive to build one of these, and then you're basically selling lettuce on the back end, and that's not a huge. You're not going to make a ton of money. So that didn't really scale. And even vertical harvest, which I saw back in 2017, is just now expanding to its next 2 locations. And you can read about AppHarvest is having a ton of issues with cash flow, and so I said, okay, that's probably not.
But wait a second, why are these? I mean, like everything that you just said makes sense in regards of being so close to fresh foods and vegetables. I mean, Vertical Harvest, they're selling a lot of their food to Whole Foods now, which is a great thing. But why is it so expensive, and why is it taking so long to actually grow? Like not just the food, but the industry itself.
I think it comes down to food. When you take a tomato or lettuce or anything off the plant, it is a deteriorating product. It's a inverse like in the first 72 hours, a piece of produce will lose most of its nutritional value, and it varies.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say that in the first how many hours?
It varies, but in the first 72 hours or something, it'll lose a lot of its nutritional value. And I'm sure you and your listeners have had the experience of you buy a thing of lettuce or a thing of spinach or something, and it sits in the back of the fridge, and when you remember it, oh, it's all like wilted or gross or moldy or whatever.
But it's weird. It's weird though, because and this is always like a scary moment for me where I have a farm share. So I have like a FBC and farm direct. And like literally at 3 o'clock today, it's a Tuesday, I'm gonna go pick it up. That food will, if not stored properly, will deteriorate faster than if I go to the market. It has no taste whatsoever. Tomatoes, I don't even know how they're even growing tomatoes. They don't taste like tomatoes that I get from my farm share. And they will sit in the refrigerator and they're like living a longer life. My carrots, my tomatoes, my cucumbers are living a longer life, which scares me because when I get it in the farm share, they pick it in the morning and we get them in the afternoon. So when you're saying it has a shelf life, well, they're coming in from Mexico and they're living long. What are they putting in our food that is living long? And yet I know I'm getting it from a farm that is driving distance from where I am, and they're not living long.
Do you really want to know the answer?
You might as well tell us. Yeah, might as well just tell us.
So it's not for everyone. It's not for every type. I know some crops, they'll like coat them in a certain type of wax
the cucumbers. They do that. Yep.
Some I think potatoes, they'll hit with a very small dose of radiation to stop them from growing the little,
the eyes.
There's a ton of different methods. I mean, part of it is just natural selection, like picking after generation. A lot of it gets thrown away. A lot of it is just, hey, that's what's left, and they toss out so much. So part of that is history again. For most of human history, for most of the last 12,000 years, we've lived right where we grow our food because that's what most people have done historically. Mm-hmm. And my thinking is, look, not everybody needs to be working in a field. We've sort of separated those two things, right? But I don't think that means we have to live here on the East Coast and get our food from Mexico or California or wherever. Yeah. I think we can co-locate that food production with people. It just takes technology, mm-hmm. right? And I think the challenge right now is how do you make that pay? because nobody's willing to invest unless it has a return. And that's sort of I think that's where the industry is right now. Which is why, yes, Atlas is a food company, but really we sell a piece of equipment. We sell hardware, right? We're not selling food. We're selling, this is a piece of technology. We're going to supply you with the seedlings. We're going to supply you with the nutrients. We're going to supply you with all that. But ultimately, you're going to grow your own food.
Yep.
And we think it's going to be cheaper than if you were buying it otherwise.
There was like a woman on this interview that I was listening to saying how I don't maintain, I'm sorry, it was another interview in regards of like a wall. Like, they just a beautiful, instead of having a piece of artwork, you just have walls of just grass or whatever is growing. And they were saying how maintaining it, like, I have no idea how to maintain it, but this is what it costs. Like $200 to $400 a month. Someone comes in, maintains it, just like if they were going to maintain your pool.
Was it Zalbin?
My guy, like, I have to find it. Was literally, like, I'm telling you, CBS
Zalbin.
Sunday News is like where I get a lot of my information. I love it. But she was in Santa Barbara. But it is one of those moments where the people they sway away from the costs, although it makes sense. But the cost of maintaining is what deters people. Or even like those those white towers where I can sit there and have like the water funneling through and then the light, and you're like, well, my electric bill is higher, or it's not supposed to be higher. So a lot of people are interested in doing the herbs and doing all these things, but the cost scares them.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think it's the reason we're not going to consumers just yet. We're going B2B, is that the consumer market's super crowded. You got to spend a ton on Instagram ads. Basically the unit price is going to be like $1,000, which is out of reach for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, and most people don't use as much food as restaurants do. Basically nobody uses as much food as restaurants.
Yeah.
So we are entering the market with restaurants, with chefs, with people who are using a lot and throwing a lot away. And this will have, we think, a larger impact on their bottom line. That's where we're starting. And then with scale, we think we can bring the production costs down so that we can still maintain our margins, still maintain our profitability, still use that to grow the business, but bring a lower price point for the consumer market. Because like I said before, I think this should be accessible. I think everybody should be able to have it, even if you live in the most broom closet of an apartment in New York, you should be able to have fresh food, access to that. Greenery is so good for your mental health. And I think there's also a benefit to, like, I grew this, even if it's sitting on the wall and it's all automated and that's okay. There's hey, I watched this go from this to this, and then I turned it into a meal that I cooked, and like, I think there's something special there. So
we live in a world where during the pandemic, everyone knows and remembers that lines and lines and lines of people for food in Texas. Texas, biggest state, and everyone's like, oh my God, how is this even happening? Not only in Texas, but happening in this country. You're seeing and hearing about this in so many other countries. You could have gone any route. You chose to go into the route of food. How do I want to say this? There's food disparity in so many different locations in our world. And you're going into the world where this is a game changer for a lot of individuals. What part do you want to take in this? Because you come from a place where you're modest. Like, educators, very smart. Yes, your dad's a surgeon, but but still educators. So educators, history, you've traveled around. It's not like you've had a bad life. You've had a very nice life. But you're going into a world where you're going to see the worst of the worst when it comes to food disparities in a lot of different areas. What is it that you want to do long term? Yes, you're going to make money. This is like a product that you're going to sell off. But at the end of the day, where do you want your legacy to end up?
So on some of the pitches, I didn't give it at Summer Venture Program because that was supposed to be much tighter. But some of the pitches I've given, I talk about the long-term vision, and this is a 100-year vision, goes beyond Atlas, goes beyond me. But I think our cities need to change. I think if we want it, we can have cities that grow all of our food. There's an idea, an aesthetic, you Google it, it's called solar punk.
Mhm.
And if you look that up, it's sort of, cyberpunk is sort of like the dystopian future, and solar punk is the opposite. It's like, well, what if everything works out nicely? What if
Yeah.
technology actually makes our lives better? And it's these, if you Google it, it's these beautiful green cities where, I mean, you're seeing it more and more. A green wall or greenery
Mhm.
is integrated. I was just on the High Line in New York City last week, which I thought was amazing. But
The High Line is amazing.
of course I saw it and I was like, well, what if all these plants were native crops and you could just walk along and that was your grocery shopping? I sort of see, or I sort of hope for a future, a post-scarcity future where you can walk down the street on your way home and pick your salad from a giant green wall, and it's food is decoupled from being a commodity. Um, and I realize that's a little utopian, but I think we have to sort of shoot for that, and maybe we don't get 100% of what we want, but to get to there, I think we have to have a product and a business that is profitable, that is able to grow on its own, and not
Mhm.
have to rely. Part of the way I've designed the business is very much bootstrapping, growing off revenue, because you know investors can come in and say, look, you need to hit these numbers this quarter, and I don't care. I compromise the mission, compromise values, get
Yeah.
that number. So I'm very wary of that. Um, yeah.
So again, what does your future look like? Not just the future, but what does your future look like?
I like to build things. So one of my grandfathers is a history professor. The other had a hardware store. He and his, I guess, my great grandfather started this hardware store in the 1940s, I think. And I would always go as a kid and hop on all the tractors. And I was a kid from the city. I had never ridden a tractor for real, but he was always there. He always had the right tools to build something. I remember he came into school one time. He did like we made these like wooden boats. It was like this workshop, and all the kids, like, we just had like a screwdriver, but it was like, oh, we built this, and like wooden dowels and something. Um, and I loved playing with Legos as a kid. I like building things. Um, so I think there's a few products with this business, physical products. Uh, I don't know if I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing this. I can't tell you that. I as our conversation uh, showed, like when I was, you know, 19, I thought I was going to go to law school, and then when I was 23, I thought I was going to work in government, and then when I was, um, you know, the last few years, I've had more of a direction. But I think being open to, hey, this new opportunity came up, and I'm gonna go and see what it is always a good way to approach things.
What were the, I mean, you were creating this business during the pandemic. Um, it was growing during the pandemic. For anyone that's listening, what were the highs and what were the lows of doing this? Because growing a business is hard. Doesn't matter what time. I mean, it doesn't matter when, it's hard. But doing it during a pandemic added a little bit extra elements and something that was so historic because it never happened before. So what were the challenges that you met? And what were the opportunities that came your way because of it?
Yeah, I think one of the challenging things, I think whenever you're starting a new business, especially something that's sort of, um, there's not really, I think I've gotten better at describing it as, hey, it's vertical farming for restaurants, or it's farm to table in a box, or something like that. But for a while I was describing it as hydroponics, which is accurate. It's an accurate way to describe it, but most people don't know that term. Um, and that's just water work. It's you can look it up. Um, I think you talk about your business, you talk about your baby, and someone just says, hmm, nah, I don't think so. I don't think that'll work. And it's not, it's I almost feel like it would be easier if it's the indifference. I think if they were saying that's never going to work, you're going to fail, it's like, oh, really? Like, let's let's see. And I've had people who've done that, and I get sort of very angry, but also very motivated, and then I go and work my butt off, and then I have something. Um, and that's happened several times. With like specifically, so I have a hydroponic tower. The first version in my apartment, I built it out of PVC and I grew kale on it, and I was like, oh, I can do this. And I remember building that because I forget exactly who it was. Someone, someone in a more senior role, it was a professor or a connection, said, "No, I don't think this is like possible." It's like, and I was just like, "Well, now it has to happen." Um, and then I think the high points. I A year ago, I bought a bunch of towers because I realized I can't build these fast enough. I still can't build them fast enough. Uh, but I bought a bunch of towers and I put them up. I worked with a few co-working spaces in the city. I worked with Babson. I put them all over, and I put my branding all over it. Atlas Urban Farms. We have a specific brand guideline. The same exact. It's everywhere, right? And at first they were just like these little seedlings, but I grew them to the point where these towers were just overflowing with greenery. And I think I included some pictures. And if not, people check out the Instagram, Atlas Urban Farms on Instagram. And it got to the point where everybody at Babson knew me. Not my face, because we were all wearing masks, but you meet someone at Babson and they say, "What are you working on?" Because everybody has a venture there. And I'd be like, Atlas Urban Farms. Like, "Oh, you're the guy." I was like, "Yeah, that's me. I'm the guy." The really cool one though, I was at Techstars demo day last February, and I was wearing one of my sweatshirts that had Atlas on it, and a guy comes up to me. He's like, "Are you the guy with the garden thing at CIC in Cambridge?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." He was like, "Oh, that's so cool." I was like, "Oh, hey." So it's that when people recognize it sort of unexpectedly, I thought that was the so I think those are two sides of the same coin. When people say, "No, I don't think so," that's demoralizing. But when people say, "This is super cool," I think that's a really big lift.
I love that because I think that's one of the things that people don't think about so often is that you're going to get the naysayers. So of course that leads back to now what does your family think of where you are now? I mean, they've seen you in so many different positions. They've seen you in like different country, different state. What do they think of where you are now? You completed Babson, got your MBA, but then you have this new mission. What are their thoughts?
They're very proud. They
Did they
they
see it coming?
I don't know. I mean, I think my mom would tell you, "Oh, Connor can do anything." Like, she's a mom.
Mom.
Yeah, she's a total mom. And I don't know. I think it's funny. For a time I said, "Hi, I'm Connor. I'm a farmer," um, which is like not accurate, but it's also not inaccurate. Um, and then I think one too many times at networking events, people are like, "Okay, anyway, I care about blockchain, so like I don't care about you," and I stopped saying that. Now I say vertical farming, um, or blockchain or AI or pick your thing. Um, no, but my great grandfather, my mom's maternal grandfather had a tomato farm uh in New Jersey, and he was doing this like 100 years ago. And what he does and what I do are not like too different, you know.
Full
And my
circle.
mom's, yeah, and my mom has a garden, and my grandfather used to have grow raspberries, and it's it's I don't know, it's not out of the realm of possibility, I guess is how I would put it.
I love that. I think that's one of the things where people never understand why I ask so many questions at the beginning about who you are, because I always say everything in your life comes full circle, and you just did it. Full circle, perfectly done. Well
I
done,
mean, it
my
was
friend.
planned. Again,
I love it.
yeah, it was planned.
It was all
It was,
planned. It was all planned.
yeah.
I have loved the time that we've spent just to understand what you do, why you do it, who you are. And this industry is growing. I mean, it's growing faster
Yeah.
and faster because we live in the Northeast and winter is coming. I mean,
Yes,
winter is
yes, it
coming.
is.
And it is one of the biggest frustrations as a, like, from July to October, I know where where I get my food every Tuesday, and I get so excited, but I get so sad because I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna have to go to like a market. Like, I'm gonna have to go to the supermarket. And I get so sad knowing the quality is just dramatically different, that I rely on frozen foods, because at least I'm getting, there's a fighting chance with frozen food versus the fresh food that's not fresh. So I do appreciate that you're in this realm. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate that you see, I mean, you're seeing it. You're seeing that there's like a growing possibility that a lot of people are never going to see or eat green food, like fresh green food, like within like miles of their door. And so just being part of that solution is, I mean, makes me excited. I mean, this is why I reached out to you, because I'm like, he's part of the solution. He's part of the solution.
Yeah.
So I really cross my fingers that everything continues to work in this progression for you, because it is slow moving back then, but it could be fast moving now, because during the pandemic, we saw that we are in trouble and we need more individuals like working on this. And so maybe it might be expediting now because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate truth is climate change is going to force us to adapt our food system. If you really want to scare yourself, Google what's going to happen to soil exhaustion in the 2050s. Our soil is going to lose all of its nutrients. And you're seeing issues with the ongoing war in Ukraine with
the
food
grain.
supply. Another piece I should add to the long-term vision: staple crops like wheat or rice or something like that aren't really viable to do vertically or hydroponically. I think that would be a really interesting area to get into. But
why is it not stable?
They're just not economical at this point.
Okay.
Really, if you're doing it to, and again, this goes back to, we sell technology, we don't sell food. If you're selling the food, you can really grow herbs, leafy green, like lettuce, because lettuce grows like a weed on these things. Tomatoes, and maybe berries.
Okay.
That's pretty much that's what you can make a profit on.
Okay.
So that's sort of where we are, and you can do other things, but it's not the easiest. And root vegetables you can't really, because of the way the setup is. But
exactly. Well, I was gonna say, like, that's where the embargo really like took hit for Mexico, because they grow. If you have you have the heat, you have like easy growing tomatoes, avocados, and stuff like that. Where, I mean, since I was younger, I mean, I go to Seattle often, and it drove me crazy where I could go to the farmers market in Seattle and get these beautiful avocados, beautiful mangoes, and everything like that. Or if I want a really great mango from my parents' fruit tree in Florida, but why are we going to Mexico? Why are we going to places where we're getting these tiny little avocados and these tiny little things when they can be great, like they can actually be grown in our country? So that's always been my biggest pet peeve, where like, I don't understand. And everyone's like, well, it's cheaper to get it from Mexico than to get it from California. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking? I'm in Boston, Mexico, California, same distance. I've been to both. So drives me absolutely bananas. But yes, like, I go in my HBS course, we knew exactly in regards of, you can make a lot more money when it's coming from Mexico. We get it. It's not right. I get it as a business person. It's just not right. And it's going to backfire, and because it's backfired on many times when the second there's an embargo, with the second there's like a conflict, we're not getting avocados and we're not getting tomatoes. All right. With all that being said, this is not the last conversation, because one of the things that you guys are the experts. You're living, breathing, eating this every single day. And when things come up, I could sit there and just pull in a lot of you guys to have the conversation, because you're not the only person that we've had on where, I mean, I've had someone in regards to the trucking situation where now we have all this food and they're sitting in a truck, like they're sitting in a barge in the ocean. I'm like, that food is like deteriorated. It's gone. Like you've just lost like millions of dollars of crops. So
Yeah.
the discussion is going to continue as we go into the winter, as more things start to affect us. So this is not our last conversation. So I love that you are the historian of this, because you love that history of knowing why. And what were you going to say?
No, just on that, part of the reason I think when urban food supply kept coming into my mind is the historical perspective. You know, you put it in business terms, what's the total addressable market of people who eat? Everybody.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
know, what's the market of people who are going to eat in the future? Everybody.
Everybody.
Doesn't matter if we all upload maybe if we upload ourselves to the metaverse, doesn't matter what happens with blockchain, we got to eat.
Yeah.
It's got to, that has to come from somewhere, and you have to grow it somewhere. And that's like, oh, cool, you have a enterprise software with this many people are going to be users. Okay.
Yeah.
We got on without this type of software, that type of software for thousands of years. We can't do it without food. Got to come from somewhere.
100%. Absolutely. All right. So as I end this conversation, not all conversation, but this end conversation, we always end it in the same exact way. If you had a personal ask and a professional ask, what would it be? We ask so much for our businesses, but we never ask for ourselves. So I allow you to stare and give two asks. What are your two asks that you want the listeners, the universe to hear?
So professional ask, I think I'm just looking to talk to more people in the food industry, specifically chefs and people in the restaurant industry. I think with the larger sort of franchises, chains, companies, sustainability folks, and sort of getting an understanding of, right now we're really trying to make our dollar on, we're going to save you money, but we do think there's going to be an aesthetic, sustainable sort of marketing piece to it. And I just haven't spoken to enough of those folks. So really anybody, chefs, chef owners, restaurants, folks at larger industry organizations that are interested in sustainability would love to talk. Even if it's not for something right now, I like starting relationships early and laying the groundwork, getting to know people, and you know, hey, if it's 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road, hey, you're the right person. Great, we already know each other. Personally, I love to read, and I have just been so heads down on work recently. I especially love to read fantasy novels. So anything escapist, anything like, let me go away to Middle Earth, or you know, Westeros, or wherever it is. Basically all the big fantasy shows, I watch them. So really books, but especially fantasy, and especially ones with a non-Western influence. So I just finished a book by Ken Liu, who's from Boston, that's sort of Chinese fantasy inspired, and I'm about to start a book by Marlon James, which is more, it's what is it? I'm looking right at it. Moon Witch, Spider King, which is more African inspired. So those world influenced fantasy novels are just, I love them.
Again, I'm just saying, full circle. Hi, kid from Pennsylvania, goes to Indonesia, opens his mind, and now like, I can sit there and read a regular, like, you know, a Harry Potter book. Actually, no, Harry Potter doesn't go international, but like, but it's good, because I always say you cannot leave your area and be the same person, despite the fact that you're like, I'm this like cookie cutter person. You can't be. I mean, like, your world changes whether you like it or not. So I do love that. And I mean, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I would have never, like, most people ask for book recommendations. I go, that's actually a good one. I like that. And I love the fact that you take your time, because I'm an audiobook person, just because I can't sit. I mean, I love reading, but I can't sit still, because I feel like there should be something else like I'm doing. But I love my audiobooks because I run to chapters. I'm a runner. I run to chapters. This is where I love your dad, because I'm running marathons, and everyone's like, I go, well, you were a sprinter in college and high school. I go, I know, but I'm like, marathons, but they're there. They're just there. But the running to chapters has always been the thing. Or you could eat off the floor of my house, because I'm like, on Fridays I put on an audiobook, and then by Sunday they're done, because I'm just doing things with it. So, but the fantasy of the cultural fantasy ones, I would have never thought about that one. So I'm gonna check the one out. Send me some recommendations yourself.
I absolutely will. I can talk fantasy novels for days.
Okay, this is good.
Yeah.
Connor, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, Thank you so much for having me.
No, this was really, really good because I think that sometimes people forget that entrepreneurs aren't like 12-year-olds. I mean, there's been a whole life before your company started, and you've had a full life. Like, and that's what the kidding part of this was like, oh, thank you very much for, like, like a young guy. You've done
Yeah.
so much in that short period of time, and I can't wait to see what happens next because everyone has more than one career in them. And I think that sometimes people
Yeah.
forget because everyone's like, yeah, I've had this job for 25 years and I got to watch when I retired. I'm like, well, that's good. I commend you on that one. But there's so much more that you can do. And I love that you've been doing so much that has gotten you to where you are right now. Because whatever you're doing right now may end and then you may do something else. But this is like right. I mean, this makes sense to me for all the things that you've done thus far.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's